Femi's jaws moved in satisfaction until he felt a sting in his belly.
Hello everyone and welcome to Represented Podcast, Storybooks and More for African Kids. As always, my name is Toyefalogi Ekezie. And for those of you who've been listening, you kind of know the goals of this podcast. But for you newbies out there, well, what we do is shine a light on the amazing children's content out there by African authors and content makers. Now, today, Ugo's not around, but we're still going to have some fun in the studio. We meet today an award-winning writer and author. We do. His name is Oyeku. He's a writer of prose, poetry, and screenplays. He made an early mark in 2004 when his first children's book, First Among Equals, was selected by the World Bank for distribution across schools and libraries in Nigeria. In 2015, his young adult novel, Tears of the Lonely, won the Ezenwa Ohaeto Prize for Fiction by the Society of Young Nigerian Writers. In 2016, his poem Reeds on the Rivers was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. He was shortlisted for the Golden Baobab Prize in 2016 and 2018 respectively. He's really just full of awards. And there's even another. In 2019, he won the Anna Prize for Children's Literature for his book Mafoya and the Finish Line. He recently published his 8th children's book, Queen Moremi Makes a Promise. He is a member of SCBWI, that's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. We, of course, would want him to join ACAIN, Association of Children Authors and Illustrators of Nigeria. Asides writing, he loves traveling and telling stories. He's the founder of the creative publishing firm 11th House. Can't wait to meet him. So, stay tuned. We're just going to take a quick break. I'm Toyefalogi Ekezie, and if you're enjoying this episode of Represented Podcast Storybooks and More for African Kids, brought to you by Simone's Oasis and Africa Business Radio, why not listen to our other podcast, Special Moms Africa? Real talk on special needs parenting. Don't forget to put on your notifications, like, and enjoy. Welcome back, and let's meet Mr. Oyeku. Hi, Ayo.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's definitely a pleasure. Please, let's go straight in. You are so prolific. What inspired you to become a writer and an author?
That's a good question. I never wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be an author.
Really?
Yes, I never wanted to. I just loved reading. I guess because my daddy had books in the shelves and he wanted myself and my brother to read all the books. But as time went by, I got into the secondary school and I had this friend who happens to be a bookworm sort of. He's always in the library to read books, and I became curious and I joined him, and in a matter of weeks I became a book lover like that, my friend, and we talk about the books we read. And in the space of like a year after, we started writing too. So we share our poems, share our stories and all that. And gradually it became a thing for me, like it became like a challenge. Like, I think I can do this. And here I am today, and that's how I started.
So I want to ask, was there a particular book that really got you hooked in that journey you just described?
That's quite difficult because obviously I know I read so many books. Some of the books that got me engaged happens to be this book by Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Yes.
Yes, and these Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Yes.
So sometimes I try to put myself into that character because it's an adventurous book, definitely, and it's kind of very, very exciting. And I read lots of foreign books As a matter of fact, I read lots of foreign books. But by the time I turned, I think 14, I read this African book, Weep Not Child. Weep Not Child by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. It felt relatable. I think that's it. It's something like
familiar.
Okay, this is something familiar. Like, okay, is this really happening somewhere in Africa? Did this really happen? You know, or like the Western stories that I read while I was growing up, while I was finding myself. So I was like, okay, if this writer can write this kind of story, it's if you've read Weep Not Child, it's pretty different from reading Things Fall Apart, which is a bit more matured, reading any of Wole Soyinka's material. But if you're reading Weep Not Child, there's this very young boy that happens to be the protagonist named Njoroge. So sometimes I imagine I am that boy, and I'm like, okay, I like what this author did with his story, and that got me just kind of trapped in, and that was it for me. So I knew that, okay, from this spot, I want to do what this author has done. Maybe not in the same way, but I think that game of identity, finding yourself in the stories you read, is something I want to share with the world too.
And that's really, really powerful, because for you, that was a pivotal moment to understand that, oh, wait, stories can also include, you know, the familiar from where you're from.
Exactly.
And for children and young people, you know, I know you mentioned Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe, but those books, while they're amazing, they're not always so approachable for the younger person to really, really connect with. And so you've highlighted why it's so important for there to be people like you who write children's books, but are focused on writing stories that are familiar to the area in which we reside, we live, you know, our continent, our country, because there's so much power in that. Now, the books you write, what generally is the age range you focus on?
Okay, let me start this way. I didn't want to write for children at the inception. I wanted to write a full-length novel at the age of 16. So, which I did. So then I got a publisher when I turned 17. So my publisher gave me lots of children's books by Nigerian authors, and he told me that might make a good start for my career as a writer. So I didn't really like him. You know, I think it was a time, that was way back 2002. It was a time whereby children's fiction wasn't really that recognized or celebrated. So I was like, okay, if people celebrate novels and poems, I want to do that instead. So he sort of convinced me and said, okay, let's make a start with it. So I did, and that was how I started. So even when I started, I could not really pick the genre, the particular space into which my writing was fitting into. But as I grew in the industry, like I kept on writing, so I knew, okay, there are different categories of writing, there are different kind of fields that I can write into. So currently, I usually write chapter books. So like Mafia and the Finish Line is a chapter book, Legend of Ataoja is a chapter book. And these chapter books are usually for kids within ages as young as, let's say, 6 to as old as 11. But
Wow.
basically it's meant for like ages 7 to 9, you know. Then recently I started working on picture books too. It's even quite fascinating. It's something that I never thought I would try to lay my hands on. I was thinking, okay, I'll do chapter books. Then someday I'll do a full-length children's novel. I really, really want to, because of this, my experience with Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. I'm like, okay, I really, really want to do something like that, you know. So, but currently I've worked on picture books too. Now there are two kinds of picture books. Like we have the early picture books and you have the older picture books.
Yep.
So currently I have like an early picture book which is applicable to kids from like, let's say, ages 3, as low as 3 to like as old as 8. So I have one that Queen Morimi Makes a Promise. Then I have another one coming out next year, All Things Being Equal. If it comes out next year, that's an older picture book which is more applicable to kids from like ages 7 to like ages 9, 10, 11. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, it just shows how dedicated and hardworking you are. Now, quickly, before we read an excerpt from your book, can you share with us what is it really like? You know, this authoring journey, you know, illustrating all that, getting your works together, focusing on children's books. What has been really good about it? What has been really terrible about it? You know, what's the good and bad?
Wow. That's a big question. Oh my God. If I should start sharing, there's a lot to share. I had the highs and I had the lows. Even till now, I still have the highs and I have the lows. For example, one of the lows I experienced just yesterday is me asking for my royalty statement from one of my publishers. I'm like, okay, how well is this book actually doing in the market? And
Yes.
I'm seeing figures that I don't like, you know. So one of the lows, like they're like, okay, you're not really selling. I'm like, are you sure about that? You know. And the highs, I think one of the highs that got me still writing was sometime in 2004, after my first book was published. That's First Among Equals. I actually got the title from a friend who was talking. He just said, hey, hi, Oyo. He said, your primus inter pares secundus nulli. That was the way he put it. I'm like, what's that? There's a Latin word for first among equals, second to none. He said, that's the first time I'm hearing it. I'm like, I like that. So I was like, okay, let me create a story around that, you know. So I did a story around that, and the story did good, and I got a lot of acceptance.
Wonderful.
Now, even though the book was selected by the World Bank, and what the World Bank did was to buy 1,000 copies of that book and distribute it across libraries in Nigeria. So that sort of gave us a kind of open
boost.
channels to sell the books. So by the time we took the books to like states in the Southwest, they easily accepted it. So the book was on the curriculum for years and really did good numbers. Like I was sure that I was selling a minimum of 5,000 every year, 5,000 copies every year.
Wow.
You know, but there was this particular woman who happens to be a neighbor at the time. So I was coming back from the university. I just came home to check on my parents, and this woman called me aside and said, I saw your book. And this is me that I like kind of fading into thin air. I don't like people stopping me or communicating or disturbing me. Like, okay. So she was like, I said, which book is that? You know, I said, First Among Equals. So she brought it out. She said the book was recommended for our kids in their school. And she was like, I'm so excited that you've grown so fast. You are this little boy that comes to my shop to play video games with your brother, and here you are, you're authoring a book, and it's actually fantastic, and I love it. And she just started praying for me.
Oh,
you know, I was like, this thing that felt so little to me felt so big to her, and I was deeply encouraged. I've had other experiences, many experiences where people give me the accolades and the support and the love, and I've seen my work open doors to me in places that I never even thought I would enter, you know.
Amen.
So it's actually been very encouraging. So the downsides, some of the downsides, like I said earlier, is you want to be sure your books do as much numbers as you expect. Like, okay, you expect, okay, your book should have done like 1,000 copies, 5,000 copies, then somebody's telling that your book has not done that. Then you have publishing issues, you have royalty issues, you have publicity issues, you're having setbacks. I can remember going on a TV set to do a recording, and the recording never made it to live program because of one issue or the other. You know, the stress you put in, the time you put in the traveling.
It's a lot.
You know, so there's a lot of things that sort of creates the setback. But I think what usually fires me on is I'm doing it for my generation and the generations to come.
That's right.
I'll be proud if our kids are reading our stories and they can actually tell it to their friends. It won't be so nice if our own kids are telling us about some Western book, some Western author, and they are making a big deal out of it. And I'm like, okay, they're actually Nigerian authors that can do the same, you know.
And yes,
So
there are.
that's
So,
like-
Ayo, let's continue. So, children listening, you can see how passionate, you can hear how passionate Ayo is and the reasons behind what he does, which really matches
Yeah.
what we do on this podcast. So let's not keep you waiting anymore. Let's read an excerpt from his latest book, Legend of Ataoja. Can you quickly tell us, Ayo, a summary of what the book is about?
The legend of Ataoja was drawn from the royal line of the Oshogbo kingdom. So it's basically about a young boy named Oriade, who happens to be a prince, an heir to the royal kingdom. So he was meant to become a king after his mother steps down from being the regent to the throne. But somehow the mother decided to remarry. She had a new husband, and the man's name is Femi. So Femi, knowing fully well that he is not a rightful heir to the throne, decided to get some mysterious magical powers, and with those powers he could shapeshift himself into different beings. By having that power, Femi returned back to Oshogbo and took the stool from Femi and his mother. And in the process, there was a sort of war, and Femi and his loyal friends had to leave the throne. And Oriade had to leave the throne. And while Oriade went on that very long journey, he tried to rediscover himself and find the means by which he could reclaim the throne that is rightfully his.
Wonderful. What an adventure. So, without further ado, let us read chapter 4, which is titled The Strange Journey, from The Legend of Ataoja by Ayo Oyeku.
Daybreak met the 14th riders beyond the climbs of Oshogbo. The horses galloped through the forest and over the hills. They crossed the river where the tides were low but never stopped to drink or rest. Danku, we are approaching the borders of Oyo Empire. Is that where we are heading to? One of the soldiers asked. No, we will veer towards the road that leads to Benin Kingdom, Danku replied. Is that our destination? No, we are heading east. We are in the east. Enough, Femi barked. The color of the seething anger in his eyes matched with the glowing sunlight rising above their heads. Everyone stayed silent. Femi thrashed his horse, and it galloped faster.
The journey continued through the day and night. They stopped to drink water once a day. They barely stopped to eat. They burnt thickets of bush along their path. They cut down branches obstructing the road. Days became weeks, and the horses became weary. They reached a land without water. The horses fell and died. They set out on foot and trudged on. On another day, like the previous ones, without food and water, they all fainted. Femi felt a hot wind on his face and slowly opened his eyes. He could not tell for how long he had fainted. He looked up and saw an old, black and weird-looking woman standing before him. "Sometimes we encounter the people we seek on our journey," the old woman replied in a garbled manner. "What people we seek on our journey?" the old woman replied in a garbled manner. "What makes you think you are the one I'm seeking?" "Orisha Femi, it is me you seek. Rise up." Femi was surprised to hear his full name. He rose to his feet like he was under a spell. He trembled when she narrated how he married Bewa, attempted to become king, failed to be chosen by the oracle, and was on a journey to find charms that would make him the most powerful person in the world. "I can give your journey the required destination by making you the most powerful person in the world," she assured with a tone of confidence. "Everything you said is true. Please, help me." Femi fell on his knees and begged. The hot wind returned and snapped all his men into wakefulness. Danku was the first to get up. He ran forward to protect his master from the strange woman, but Femi told him to stay calm. The 12 soldiers got up and stayed behind Danku. "Eat this."
The old woman unclenched her fist to reveal a mushroom. Femi was not afraid. He stepped forward, took it, and chewed it. It tasted like porridge, garnished with crabs and dried fish. Femi's jaws moved in satisfaction until he felt a sting in his belly. The pain increased and persisted. He clutched his belly and collapsed on the floor. Danku ran forward. "Leave him!" The old woman shouted, and Danku halted. "He has fallen as a man, but will rise as a god." The hot wind returned and hovered above Femi for some minutes. When he vanished, Femi raised his head and his eyes became fiery. The old woman cackled heavily, and the 12 soldiers shook with fear. They all watched with amazement as she ran forward, shape-shifted into a big black bird, and flew away. Danko and the soldiers screamed and huddled together in fear. "Now I know what to do," Femi said between clenched teeth. "What is it that you must do, Esther?" Danko stammered, still astonished by the way the old woman turned into a bird. Within the blink of an eye, Femi ran forward, shape-shifted into a bull, and gored his 12 soldiers to death. Danko was terrified. He realized he had witnessed how his master became powerful, and the sacrifice of the 12 was a warning not to reveal the secret to any man. "Let us go to Oyo," Femi ordered as he returned to human form. Danko followed his master with trembling feet. He did not ask why they were heading to Oyo Empire.
Very interesting. I think I'm going to have to read the whole book myself, actually. It's really, really wonderful, well written, definitely an adventure story, which I think a lot of children are going to love. But Ayo, that's all we have time for today. I want to really thank you for making the time to share your experience of being an author with us and your book, Legend of Ataoja. Where can our listeners find you on social media?
Thank you for having me to connect with me. It's quite easy. My name is Ayo_Oyeku on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram.
Fantastic. And so that's it for this episode, listeners. My name is Toye Falugi Ekezie, and you can of course find us at Simone's Oasis. This has been Represented, the podcast, storybooks and more for African kids. Thank you for listening. Till the next time. Bye. For sponsorship inquiries, you can DM us at Simone's Oasis on social media or send an email to hello@simones-oasis.com.